I walked into the living room where my sister sat on the white leather sofa, the one she'd picked out using money from our family's construction business account. She was scrolling through her phone, probably looking at property listings in Dubai. My husband sat next to her, his hand resting on the armrest between them, not touching her, not yet, but close enough that I knew. I set the folder on the coffee table. The wire transfer confirmations were on top. $650,000, moved in increments over 18 months, from our joint account to hers, then from hers to an account in the United Arab Emirates. My sister looked up. Her expression didn't change. She'd always been good at that. My husband cleared his throat. He started to say something about how this wasn't what it looked like, but I held up my hand. I smiled, quietly, the way you smile when you've already won and you're just waiting for everyone else to catch up. Then I pulled out my phone and made one call. The fraud report had been filed 3 hours earlier. The FBI Financial Crimes Division was already reviewing the case, but they didn't know that yet. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. Let me know which city you're watching from in the comments. I know what you just saw sounds impossible. I know it sounds like the kind of betrayal that only happens in movies, but I need you to understand something before I go any further. Every word of what I'm about to tell you is true. Every dollar amount, every conversation, every lie. My name is Victoria Sandoval. I'm 41 years old. And the moment you just witnessed was the culmination of 14 months of planning, 6 attorneys, 2 forensic accountants, and more sleepless nights than I can count. But to understand how I got there, to understand how my own sister could steal that much money while my husband helped her hide it, I have to take you back. Back to when I still believed family meant something. Back to when I thought the people closest to you were supposed to protect you, not destroy you. I was 32 when I married Daniel Reeves. He was 35. We met at a construction industry conference in Phoenix. I was there representing my father's company, Sandoval Construction. Daniel was a project manager for a competing firm. He had this confidence about him, the kind that comes from always being the smartest person in the room, or at least believing you are. My father, Roberto Sandoval, had built the company from nothing. He'd started as a day laborer in his 20s, worked his way up, saved every penny, and eventually started his own residential construction business. By the time I was born, Sandoval Construction was clearing $8 million a year in revenue. Not massive, but solid, reliable, respected. I was the oldest of 3 children. My sister Alina was 2 years younger than me. My brother Miguel was the baby, 5 years younger than Alina. From the time we could walk, my father made it clear that the business would stay in the family. All 3 of us would have a place. All 3 of us would share in what he'd built, but there was an unspoken hierarchy. I was the one who actually worked. I had my contractor's license by 23. I managed job sites. I negotiated with suppliers. I handled the numbers when my father's bookkeeper retired. Alina worked in the office doing administrative tasks, answering phones, filing permits. Miguel was still in college when Daniel and I got married, studying business management and making vague promises about joining the company eventually. My mother, Carmen, had her own ideas about how things should go. She'd always favored Alina. Always. When we were kids, Alina got the bigger bedroom. Alina got the private school tuition while I went to public school. When Alina wanted to study abroad for a semester in college, my mother found the money. When I asked for help with my contractor's exam fees, she told me I should be more financially independent. I learned early that complaining got you nowhere in our family. You worked, you proved yourself, you earned respect through results, not words. When Daniel and I got engaged, my father offered him a position at Sandoval Construction, senior project manager, $75,000 a year to start. Daniel took it. He was good at his job, I'll give him that. He understood the construction side. He was detail-oriented. He and I worked well together for the first few years. We bought a house in Tempe, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, nothing extravagant. We had a joint checking account and a joint savings account. I made $82,000 that year. Daniel made $75,000. We were comfortable. Alina got married 2 years after us. She married a man named Troy Hansen, a pharmaceutical sales representative. Troy made decent money, around $90,000 a year, but Alina had expensive taste. She wanted the big house immediately, the luxury car, the designer handbags, and somehow she always got them. My mother co-signed on Alina's mortgage. She bought Alina a Mercedes for her 30th birthday. When Alina complained about money, my mother would quietly transfer funds into her account. I know because I saw the company books. My mother had access to the business account for household expenses, and she used it liberally when it came to Alina. I never said anything. What was the point? My mother would deny it. Alina would act offended. My father would tell me to keep the peace, so I worked. I brought in bigger contracts. I streamlined our supply chain and saved the company $200,000 over 18 months. I worked 60-hour weeks and didn't complain. The first real crack in my marriage came in the summer of 2017. Daniel and I had been trying to have a baby for about a year. It wasn't happening. I suggested we see a fertility specialist. Daniel said we should just relax and let it happen naturally. Then one night I came home early from a job site. Daniel was in our home office on the phone. I heard him say Alina's name. I heard him laugh in a way he hadn't laughed with me in months. I stood in the hallway and listened. He was talking about a property investment opportunity in Dubai. He was asking her if Troy knew about it. She apparently said no. Daniel said that was probably smart. I walked into the office. Daniel hung up quickly, too quickly. I asked him what he was talking to Alina about. He said she'd called to ask about a vendor recommendation for some work Troy wanted done on their house. I knew he was lying. Alina never called Daniel for vendor recommendations. She called me, but I didn't push it. Not then. I filed it away. I started paying attention. 2 months later, my father called a family meeting. Sunday dinner at my parents' house. He wanted to discuss the business structure. He was 68. He was thinking about retirement. He wanted to formalize the succession plan. We all sat around the dining room table, my father at the head, my mother to his right, me and Daniel on one side, Alina and Troy on the other. Miguel, who was 24 and had finally joined the company as an assistant project manager, sat at the far end. My father laid it out. He wanted to transition the company into a family partnership, equal shares for all 3 children. Me, Alina, and Miguel would each own 33%. He and my mother would retain a small percentage for their retirement income, but operational control would pass to us. There was one condition. We all had to work for the company, full-time, no outside employment. Miguel agreed immediately. I agreed. I was already working full-time anyway. Alina hesitated. She said she'd need to think about it. She had her job at the company, but it was part-time. She liked her flexibility. My mother jumped in. She said we should be understanding of Alina's position. Alina had different priorities. Maybe we could make an exception. I watched my father's face. He didn't like that suggestion, but he didn't shut it down either. The meeting ended without a final decision. My father said we'd revisit it in a month. I went home that night and started a spreadsheet. I pulled 5 years of company financial records. I tracked every transaction over $10,000. I tracked every unusual expense. I tracked every transfer from the business account to personal accounts. What I found made my hands shake. Over 5 years, my mother had transferred a total of $312,000 from the company account to Alina's personal account. Small amounts, $5,000 here, $8,000 there, never enough to trigger an audit flag, but consistent, relentless. Alina had been essentially drawing a second salary from the business without declaring it as income. Without doing work that justified it, while I was pulling 60-hour weeks. I didn't confront anyone, not yet. I made copies of everything. I stored them in a locked file cabinet in my home office. I told no one. The following month, my father formalized the partnership. Alina agreed to work full-time. The papers were signed. We each owned 33% of Sandoval Construction. At the signing, my mother hugged Alina for a long time. She kissed her cheek. She said she was so proud of her for stepping up. She shook my hand. That was October of 2017. If you've ever been counted out by someone who should have known better, you know exactly what that silence feels like. You know the specific weight of being tolerated instead of celebrated. I went back to work. I brought in a $12 million municipal contract that winter. It was the biggest contract in the company's history. I negotiated it personally. I managed the job from start to finish. It came in under budget and ahead of schedule. My father took the team out to celebrate. He gave a speech. He thanked Daniel for his hard work. He thanked Miguel for stepping up. He thanked Alina for keeping the office running smoothly. He mentioned my name once, in passing. Daniel squeezed my hand under the table. He whispered that my father was just old-fashioned, that he appreciated me even if he didn't say it. I smiled. I nodded. I excused myself to go to the restroom. I stood in the bathroom stall and made a decision. I was going to protect myself, whatever that took. I started documenting everything, every conversation, every meeting, every financial decision. I kept a detailed journal. I backed it up to 3 separate cloud storage locations. If you're still with me, stay, because what I'm about to tell you next is when the betrayal stopped being passive and became active. It was March 15th, 2018, a Thursday. I remember because it was the day before my 35th birthday. I came into the office around 7 in the morning. I liked to get there early before the chaos started. I made coffee. I pulled up the project management software to review the day's schedule. Then I noticed something odd in the accounting software. There was a transfer I didn't recognize. $50,000 had been moved from our operating account to an account I'd never seen before. The notation said equipment purchase approved by E. Hansen. E. Hansen, Alina. I opened the transaction details. The receiving account was registered to a business called Summit Property Holdings LLC. I'd never heard of it. I searched our vendor files. No record of Summit Property Holdings. I searched our equipment logs. No new equipment purchases in the past month. I pulled up the Arizona Corporation Commission website. I looked up Summit Property Holdings LLC. It had been registered 4 months earlier, November of 2017. 1 month after we'd signed the partnership agreement, the registered agent was Alina Hansen. My sister had created a shell company and transferred $50,000 of our business's money into it. I sat there staring at the screen for probably 5 minutes. My coffee got cold. Then I heard voices in the hallway. Alina and Daniel. They were early too. That was unusual. I minimized the accounting software. I opened my email. I tried to look normal. They walked past my office. I heard Alina laugh. I heard Daniel say something about meeting later. I waited until they were both in their respective offices. Then I screenshot every page of the Summit Property Holdings transaction. I emailed the screenshots to my personal email address. Then I deleted the sent email from my work account. At lunch, I drove to a UPS store 3 miles from the office. I printed everything. I put it in a manila envelope. I put the envelope in my car. That night at dinner, Daniel asked me if everything was okay. He said I seemed distracted. I told him I was fine, just tired. He said we should take a vacation, maybe go somewhere warm, get away from work for a while. I asked him if he'd talked to Alina lately, just a casual question. He said not really, just work stuff. I nodded. I changed the subject. After he went to bed, I went into our home office. I opened our joint bank account on my laptop. I went back 6 months. I was looking for anything unusual. There, December 23rd. A transfer of $15,000 from our savings to an external account. The notation said Investment D. Reeves. I'd never authorized that transfer. Daniel had done it alone. I clicked on the receiving account number. I ran it through a banking search tool. It took me 20 minutes, but I found it. The account belonged to Summit Property Holdings, LLC. My husband had transferred $15,000 of our money to my sister's shell company. I closed the laptop. I went to the kitchen. I poured a glass of water. My hands were steady. That surprised me. I went back to the office. I printed the bank records. I added them to the envelope in my car. The next day was my birthday. My mother called me in the morning. She said she and my father wanted to take everyone out to dinner that night, family celebration. We went to a restaurant in Scottsdale, upscale, the kind of place where they bring you an amuse-bouche before the meal. We ordered. We made small talk. My father asked about the municipal project. I told him it was going well. He nodded. He turned to Miguel and asked about a different project. The food came. We ate. Halfway through the meal, my mother tapped her wine glass with her fork. She said she had an announcement. She looked at Alina. Alina smiled. She said she and Troy were buying an investment property in Dubai. They were so excited. It was a growing market. They'd gotten in at the perfect time. My mother beamed. She said she was so proud of Alina for being financially savvy. I asked Alina how much the property cost. She said $800,000, but it was fine because they'd gotten a mortgage for most of it. They only had to put down 20%. I did the math in my head. 20% of $800,000 was $160,000. I looked at Daniel. He was staring at his plate. I looked at Alina. She was glowing. I said that sounded wonderful. I asked when they were planning to close. She said they already had 2 weeks ago. My mother raised her glass. She proposed a toast to Alina's success. Everyone drank. I drank. Then I excused myself to the restroom again. I stood at the sink. I looked at myself in the mirror. I'd found $65,000 in questionable transfers so far. Alina had just put down $160,000 on a property in Dubai. She didn't make enough at the company to save that kind of money. Neither did Troy. The numbers didn't add up unless there was more I hadn't found yet. I went back to the table. I smiled. I thanked everyone for the birthday dinner. I said I was tired and needed to get home. Daniel drove us home in silence. When we got inside, he asked if I was upset about something. I said no, I was just tired. Long week. He said he was going to watch TV for a while. I said I was going to bed. Instead, I went to the office. I pulled up our joint account again. I went back 2 years this time. I found 12 transfers, ranging from $8,000 to $22,000, all to Summit Property Holdings, LLC. Total amount, $173,000. My husband had been funneling our money to my sister's shell company for 2 years. I opened a new document. I started a timeline, every transfer, every date, every amount. Then I started searching for more. I found it in our investment account, the one we'd opened for retirement. Daniel had withdrawal authorization. He'd taken out 3 separate amounts over 18 months, $40,000, $35,000, $52,000. The withdrawals had been reinvested into Summit Property Holdings, LLC, $127,000 more. I added it to the timeline. Total transferred from our accounts, $300,000. I sat back. I thought about the Dubai property, $160,000 down payment. If Alina had access to $300,000 from our accounts, plus whatever she'd taken from the company accounts, plus whatever Troy had contributed, she'd have enough. I needed to know how much she'd taken from the company. I couldn't access all the accounts from home. I'd have to wait until Monday. That weekend was the longest of my life. Daniel kept asking if I was okay. I kept saying yes. On Monday morning, I got to the office at 6. I had full administrative access to the accounting system as a partner. I ran a report. All transactions over $5,000 for the past 3 years, filtered by approval authority. Alina had approved 207 transactions totaling $943,000. Most of them looked legitimate: vendor payments, payroll, standard operating expenses. But 37 of them were transfers to Summit Property Holdings, LLC. I added them up, $387,000. Combined with the $300,000 from my accounts, that was $687,000 total. But the Dubai property only required $160,000 down. Where was the rest of the money? I pulled up the Summit Property Holdings bank records. I'd got access by pretending to be Alina on a customer service call. I'd used her date of birth and social security number, information I had from company HR files. The Summit account currently held $39,000. There were regular transfers out to an international account, a bank in Dubai. I traced the receiving account. It took me 3 days and 2 calls to an international banking contact I knew from a previous project. The account belonged to a property management company in Dubai, but there was also a personal account linked to it. The personal account was in Alina's name. She wasn't just buying one property, she was building a portfolio. And she was planning to move there. My sister was stealing from our family business, using my money to do it and preparing to leave the country. And my husband was helping her. I printed everything. I added it to my growing file, then I called an attorney. Her name was Catherine Stone. She'd handled a contract dispute for the company 2 years earlier. She was sharp, ruthless, exactly what I needed. I told her I needed to see her, urgently, personal matter. She had an opening that afternoon. I went to her office at 3. I brought the file, I laid it all out, every transaction, every transfer, every lie. Catherine looked through the documents for 47 minutes without speaking. She made notes, she cross-referenced dates. Finally, she looked up at me. She said I had enough to file criminal charges, fraud, embezzlement, potentially wire fraud since the money had crossed international lines. I asked her what she recommended. She asked me what I wanted. I wanted my money back. I wanted Alina out of the business. I wanted Daniel gone. I wanted everyone who'd enabled this to understand exactly what they'd done. Catherine nodded. She said we could do that, but we needed to be strategic. If we moved too fast, Alina might transfer more money out of reach. If we filed charges immediately, she might flee to Dubai before we could freeze the accounts. She said we needed to build an airtight case, document everything, get forensic accountants involved, freeze the accounts legally, then strike all at once. She asked if I was prepared for what that meant. It would take months, maybe a year. I'd have to pretend everything was normal. I'd have to keep working with these people, keep living with Daniel, keep showing up to family dinners. I told her yes, I could do that. She said we should bring in her partner, a man named Robert Chen. He specialized in white-collar crime and asset recovery. We scheduled a meeting for the following week. I went home that night and made dinner. Daniel came home at 7. He kissed my cheek. He asked how my day was. I said it was fine, productive. He said Alina had mentioned we should all take a trip together, the 4 of us, maybe Miami or somewhere fun. I said that sounded nice. He smiled. He said he'd always liked how easygoing I was, how I never made things dramatic. I served dinner. We ate. We watched television. We went to bed. He fell asleep within minutes. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, thinking about $687,000 and how many hours of my life I'd traded for money that was now sitting in a Dubai bank account with my sister's name on it. The next morning, I went to work. I said good morning to Alina. I asked if she needed anything. She said no, she was good. I went to my office. I closed the door. I opened my laptop. I created a new folder, private, password protected, encrypted. I labeled it Project Homecoming, and I got to work. Over the next 3 months, I met with Catherine and Robert 6 times. We brought in a forensic accountant named Linda Vasquez. She traced every dollar. She found patterns I'd missed. It turned out Alina had been stealing for 5 years, not 3, 5. The total was higher than I'd thought. $912,000 from the company, $357,000 from my personal accounts. Total, $1,269,000. Linda found something else. Daniel had a separate bank account I didn't know about. He'd been receiving deposits from Summit Property Holdings LLC. $15,000 every quarter for 3 years. He wasn't just helping Alina steal. He was getting paid for it. $180,000 over 3 years. I added it to the file. Catherine filed a motion to freeze all assets associated with Summit Property Holdings LLC. She did it quietly, through a judge she knew. The freeze went into effect on a Friday afternoon in June. Alina didn't find out until the following Monday. I was in my office when I heard her scream, actual scream, from down the hall. I got up. I walked to her office. She was on the phone. Her face was red. She was yelling at someone about a banking error. She hung up. She saw me standing there. She said there was a problem with one of her accounts, some kind of freeze, probably a mistake. She'd get it sorted out. I said that sounded frustrating. I asked if there was anything I could do to help. She said no, she'd handle it. I went back to my office. That night, Daniel came home late. He was agitated. He said Alina had called him. She was panicking about some account freeze. He said it was probably just a bureaucratic thing, but he seemed worried. I said I was sure it would work out. He poured himself a drink, then another. He asked me if I'd noticed anything weird with our accounts lately. I said no. Why? He said no reason. Just checking. I told him I was going to take a bath. I left him in the living room. I sat in the bathtub with my phone. I texted Catherine. He's scared. She texted back. Good. The freeze held for 2 weeks. Alina hired an attorney. He filed a motion to unfreeze the accounts. He claimed it was a business account with legitimate funds. Catherine filed a response. She attached copies of the fraudulent transfers. She requested a full audit. The judge ordered it. Alina's attorney withdrew from the case 3 days later. Alina called an emergency family meeting, Saturday afternoon at my parents' house. We all showed up, my father, my mother, me and Daniel, Alina and Troy, Miguel. Alina stood at the head of the table. She said there had been a terrible misunderstanding. Someone had filed false claims against her business account. She was being targeted. She didn't know why. My mother reached for her hand. She said it was outrageous. Who would do such a thing? Elena said she didn't know. But she needed family support right now. She needed us to stand together. My father asked what kind of claims. Alina hesitated. She said someone was alleging financial impropriety, but it was completely false. She had done nothing wrong. I sat there quietly. I didn't say a word. Miguel asked if this had anything to do with the company. Alina said no, this was her personal business, separate. My father looked at me. He asked if I knew anything about this. I said no. First, I'd heard of it. He nodded. He told Alina he was sure she'd get it sorted out. The truth always came out. Alina smiled. She thanked him. My mother suggested we all go out to dinner, support Alina, show family unity. We went to a restaurant. We ordered. We ate. Halfway through the meal, Troy's phone rang. He looked at the screen. His face changed. He excused himself. He stepped outside. He came back 5 minutes later. He leaned over and whispered something to Alina. She set her fork down. She said she wasn't feeling well. She needed to go home. They left. The rest of us finished dinner. My mother talked about how stressful this must be for Alina, how unfair. I nodded along. I said all the right things. Daniel drove us home. He was quiet. When we got inside, he went straight to his office. I heard him on the phone, low voice, urgent tone. I went to our bedroom. I changed clothes. I came back out. He was still on the phone. I walked past the office. I heard him say, "We need to fix this before it gets worse." I went to the kitchen. I poured water. I waited. He came out 20 minutes later. He looked exhausted. He said Alina was really stressed. This whole account thing was blowing up. I said that must be hard. He said yeah, then he went to bed. I stayed up. I checked my email. Catherine had sent me an update. The forensic audit had found everything. Every fraudulent transfer, every shell company, every international account. Prosecutor's office had been notified. The next phase was about to begin. I forwarded the email to a secure folder. I deleted it from my inbox. I cleared my trash. Then I went to bed. Daniel was already asleep. I lay there in the dark. I thought about the moment this would all come crashing down. I thought about their faces when they realized I'd known for months. I thought about my mother's expression when she understood that her favorite daughter was going to prison. I thought about how quiet I'd been. How easygoing, how I never made things dramatic. I smiled in the dark. 2 weeks later, the FBI showed up at the office. 6 agents. They had a warrant. They seized all computer systems. They seized all financial records. They interviewed every employee. They interviewed Alina for 4 hours. They interviewed Daniel for 3. They interviewed me for 45 minutes. I told them everything. I provided copies of all my documentation. I showed them my timeline. The lead agent, a woman named Sarah Park, shook my hand when we were done. She said I'd done excellent work. I'd built their entire case for them. I thanked her. She said they'd be in touch. I went home. Daniel was already there. He was packing a suitcase. I asked where he was going. He said he needed to get away for a few days, clear his head. I asked if this was about the FBI. He stopped packing. He looked at me. He said he didn't know what I was talking about. I said the FBI had been at the office all day, interviewing people. Surely he'd heard. He said, yeah, he'd heard, but it had nothing to do with him. I nodded. I said, okay. He finished packing. He left. He went to Lena's house. I know because I'd had a private investigator following him for 6 weeks. The investigator sent me photos. Daniel and Alina sitting in her backyard, talking, looking worried. Troy wasn't there. Apparently, he'd left Alina 3 days after the account freeze. Filed for divorce, claimed he hadn't known about any of it. Smart man. My mother called me that night. She was crying. She said the FBI had called her. They wanted to interview her too. I said I was sure it would be fine. She said this was destroying Alina, destroying our family. I said Alina should probably hire a good attorney. My mother said I sounded very cold. I said I was just being realistic. She hung up on me. My father called an hour later. He was calmer. He asked if I knew what was really going on. I said I thought the FBI was investigating financial fraud. He asked if I knew anything specific. I said I'd been cooperating with the investigation, as we all should. There was a long silence. Then he said we needed to protect the company. Whatever was happening with Alina, we couldn't let it destroy the business. I said I agreed. He said he might need to remove Alina from the partnership temporarily, just until this got sorted out. I said that sounded prudent. He asked if I'd be willing to take on more responsibility in the interim. I said yes, of course. We hung up. I sat on my couch. I opened my laptop. I looked at the folder labeled Project Homecoming. Inside were 473 documents, bank records, wire transfers, email correspondence, text message screenshots, audio recordings, witness statements, forensic accounting reports, 14 months of work, 14 months of smiling at family dinners, 14 months of sleeping next to a man who was stealing from me, 14 months of watching my sister spend my money, every humiliation documented, every lie cataloged, every theft traced. The FBI had it all now, so did the prosecutors, so did my attorney. I'd built something bigger than I'd originally planned. I'd built a case so thorough that no attorney in the country could dismantle it. I'd been patient, strategic, precise, and now I was ready for the last phase. I closed my laptop. I went to bed early. I needed rest. Because tomorrow I was filing for divorce, and the discovery phase was going to be very, very interesting for Daniel. I filed the divorce papers on a Tuesday morning. I hand-delivered them to Daniel's temporary residence at Alina's house. The process server handed them to him at 8:43 in the morning. I know because I was sitting in my car across the street watching. He opened the door in sweatpants and a t-shirt. He looked confused when he saw the official envelope. Then he opened it. I watched his face change. He looked up at the process server. He said something. The server said something back. Then Daniel shut the door. I drove to work. I had a meeting with my father and Miguel at 9. We sat in the conference room. My father looked tired. He'd aged 10 years in the past month. He said the FBI had recommended we hire independent counsel for the company. They wanted to make sure we were separated from Alina's actions. I said that sounded wise. Miguel asked if we knew how bad it was. I said I thought it was pretty bad. My father looked at me. He asked if I'd been completely honest with the FBI. I said yes. I told them everything I knew. He nodded slowly. He said Alina's attorney had called him. She was claiming she'd been set up, that someone had framed her. I asked who she thought would do that. He said she wouldn't say. Miguel said Alina had always been dramatic, always thought she was being persecuted. My father didn't respond to that. He said we needed to focus on protecting the company. Whatever happened to Alina, we couldn't let it destroy what he'd built. I agreed. I said I had some proposals for restructuring, ways to improve our financial controls, make sure nothing like this could happen again. My father said he'd like to hear them. We spent the next 2 hours going through my recommendations, new accounting protocols, third-party audits, separation of duties, everything I'd learned from Catherine and her team. My father approved all of it. As we were leaving, he touched my arm. He said he was sorry. He should have paid more attention, should have seen what was happening. I said it wasn't his fault. He said he'd always thought I was the strong one, the one who didn't need protection. Maybe that was his mistake. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded. I went back to my office. I had an email from Catherine. Daniel had responded to the divorce filing. He was requesting mediation. He wanted to settle without a trial. Of course he did. Catherine asked if I was willing to mediate. I said yes, schedule it. She said she'd set it up for the following week. I spent the next 6 days preparing. I went through every joint asset, every shared account, every piece of property we owned together. I made a list of what I wanted, what I'd accept, what I absolutely would not compromise on. The meditation was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon on a Monday. Catherine's office. Neutral ground. I arrived at 1:45. Catherine was already there. She had 3 bankers' boxes of documentation. Daniel showed up at 1:58. He had an attorney with him, a man named Paul Richter. I'd never heard of him. We sat down, Catherine on my left, Paul on Daniel's right, a mediator named James Walsh at the head of the table. James opened with standard language about good faith negotiation, about trying to reach an equitable settlement. Daniel wouldn't look at me. James asked if Daniel wanted to make an opening statement. Paul spoke instead. He said Daniel was willing to agree to a no-fault divorce. He acknowledged the marriage was over. He wanted to divide assets fairly and move on. James asked what Daniel considered fair. Paul slid a document across the table. He prepared a proposed division of assets. Catherine read it, then she slid it to me. Daniel was proposing a 50-50 split of everything: the house, the savings, the investment accounts. The retirement funds, 50-50. I looked at Daniel. He was staring at the table. Catherine said that was an interesting proposal. She asked if Daniel had disclosed all his assets. Paul said yes, everything was in the filing. Catherine opened one of the banker's boxes. She pulled out a stack of documents. She said that was strange, because her client had documentation of several accounts Daniel hadn't listed. She slid the documents across the table. Bank statements for the account Daniel had been using to receive payments from Summit Property Holdings LLC, $180,000, not listed in his asset disclosure. Paul picked up the documents. His expression didn't change, but his eyes moved faster as he read. Daniel's face went red. Paul asked for a moment to confer with his client. James said yes. They stepped into the hallway. Catherine leaned over to me. She whispered that this was going exactly as expected. They came back 5 minutes later. Daniel looked worse. Paul said there had been an oversight. Daniel had forgotten about that account. He'd be happy to amend his disclosure. Catherine said that would be necessary. She asked if there were any other oversights. Paul said no. Catherine pulled out another stack of documents, wire transfer records, showing Daniel had facilitated $357,000 in transfers from our joint accounts to Alina's shell company. She said her client was prepared to argue that Daniel had committed fraud, that he'd stolen from their marital assets, that those funds should be returned to the marital estate before any division occurred. Paul looked at Daniel. Daniel looked like he might throw up. Paul said his client had made some poor decisions, but there was no criminal intent. Catherine said the FBI might disagree. They were currently investigating those exact transfers. The room went very quiet. James asked if Catherine's client was willing to negotiate. Catherine looked at me. I nodded. She said yes. My client was willing to settle this without involving criminal charges, but she had conditions. James asked what conditions. I spoke for the first time. My voice was calm, steady. I said Daniel would sign over his share of the house, all of it to me. I said he would relinquish all claims to my retirement accounts. I said he would agree to pay back $178,500, half of what he'd stolen. The other half would be pursued through the civil suit against Alina. I said he would sign a statement admitting what he'd done, a detailed statement that could be used in any future proceedings, and I said he would never contact me again, ever. Daniel finally looked at me. His eyes were wet. He said I was destroying him, taking everything. I said no, I was taking what was mine. He'd already taken everything else. He said he'd made a mistake. He'd gotten caught up in Alina's plans. He never meant to hurt me. I said I didn't care what he meant. I cared what he did. He said we'd been married for 9 years. That had to count for something. I pulled out my phone. I opened a voice memo. I pressed play. It was a recording from 4 months earlier, Daniel and Alina in her backyard. The private investigator had gotten it. Alina's voice, she'll never know. She's too busy working. Daniel's voice, what if she finds out? Alina's voice, then we tell her it was a loan. She can't prove otherwise. Daniel's voice, I don't know. I feel bad sometimes. Alina's voice, you didn't feel bad when you deposited the last check. Don't get soft now. Laughter, both of them. I stopped the recording. Daniel's face had gone white, actual white. Paul closed his folder. He said he needed another moment with his client. James said, take your time. They left again. This time they were gone for 12 minutes. When they came back, Daniel looked defeated, completely. Paul said his client would agree to the terms, all of them. Catherine slid the settlement agreement across the table. She'd already drafted it, every clause, every condition, waiting. Paul read it. He made Daniel read it. Daniel picked up the pen. His hand was shaking, actually shaking. He signed on the line. I watched him sign away the house, sign away his claims, sign the admission of fraud. When he finished, he set the pen down. He looked at me. He said he'd loved me once. He hoped I knew that. I said once wasn't enough. He stood up. He walked out. Paul followed him. The door closed. James said he'd file the agreement with the court. The divorce would be final in 60 days. Catherine started packing up the boxes. I sat there for a moment. I looked at the settlement agreement. Daniel's signature, still wet. Catherine asked if I was okay. I said yes, I was fine. She said I should be proud. I'd handled this perfectly. I said I'd learned from the best. She smiled. She said the FBI would want a copy of that recording. I said I'd already sent it to them. We left the office. I drove home to the house that was now legally mine. I walked through the empty rooms. Daniel had taken his things the week before, clothes, books, a few pieces of furniture he'd brought into the marriage. Everything else was mine. I stood in the kitchen. I poured a glass of water. I looked out the window at the backyard. My phone rang. It was my father. He said Alina had been indicted. Federal charges, wire fraud, embezzlement, money laundering. He said her attorney was trying to negotiate a plea deal. I asked what kind of deal. He said probably 5 to 7 years if she cooperated, returned what she could, showed remorse. I asked if she was showing remorse. He said no. She was still claiming she'd been set up, still saying someone had framed her. I said that was unfortunate. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said my mother wanted to talk to me. I said I wasn't ready for that. He said she was devastated. She didn't understand how this had happened. I said maybe she should have paid more attention, should have asked where the money was coming from. He sighed. He said I wasn't wrong. We hung up. I went to my office. I opened my laptop. I looked at the folder labeled Project Homecoming. I'd started it 14 months ago. When I'd first found the wire transfers. When I'd first realized my husband was helping my sister steal from me. Now it was over. The divorce settlement signed, the criminal charges filed, the money being traced and recovered. I'd won, but it didn't feel like I thought it would. It felt quiet, necessary, like closing a door on a room you'd never enter again. My phone buzzed, a text from Miguel. Dad told me about the divorce. I'm sorry. If you need anything, I'm here. I texted back. Thank you. I'm okay. He responded immediately. Alina called me yesterday. She wanted me to tell you she forgives you. I stared at that message for a long time. She forgives me. I didn't respond to Miguel. I just set my phone down. 2 weeks later, my mother finally showed up at my house, unannounced. She knocked on the door at 7 in the evening. I opened it. She was holding a casserole dish. She said she'd made my favorite, chicken enchiladas. I said thank you. I took the dish. She asked if she could come in. I said yes. We sat in the living room, the same room where I'd confronted Daniel about the wire transfers, where everything had started to unravel. My mother looked around. She said the house looked nice, empty but nice. I said I was still figuring out what I wanted to do with it. She said she'd heard about the settlement, that I'd gotten the house. I said yes. She asked if I was happy. I said I was relieved. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said Alina was pleading guilty. Her attorney had worked out a deal, 6 years. Federal prison. I didn't say anything. My mother said she didn't understand. She looked at the evidence. The FBI had shown her everything. She still couldn't understand why Alina had done it. I said maybe Alina wanted something she didn't have. Maybe she thought she deserved more. My mother said Alina had always had everything she needed. I looked at my mother, really looked at her. I said no. Alina had always had everything she wanted. There's a difference. My mother's face changed. Something shifted. She said she'd always tried to be fair, to treat all her children equally. I said that wasn't true, but it was okay. I didn't need it anymore. She asked what I meant. I said I didn't need her approval, her validation, her love. I'd spent 30 years trying to earn something that was never going to be given freely. I was done. My mother started crying. She said I was her daughter. She'd always loved me. I said love without respect isn't enough. She said I was being cruel. I said I was being honest. She stood up. She said she'd hoped we could fix this. Hoped I could forgive Alina, forgive all of them, move on as a family. I said I had moved on, just not in the direction she'd hoped. She left. She didn't take the casserole dish. I threw the enchiladas away. I couldn't eat them. The next day, Catherine called. She said the asset recovery process was moving forward. We'd be able to recover approximately $430,000 from Alina's accounts. The rest had been spent, property in Dubai, luxury items, travel gone, but $430,000 was better than nothing. I said I'd take it. She said she'd also been contacted by the prosecutor's office. They wanted me to testify at Alina's sentencing hearing, tell the judge how her actions had impacted me. I said I'd do it. The hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks later. Federal courthouse, downtown Phoenix. I wore a navy suit, professional, composed. Alina was already there when I arrived. She was sitting at the defense table with her attorney. She'd lost weight. Her hair was different, shorter, no makeup. She didn't look at me when I walked in. The judge was a woman named Margaret Okoye. She'd reviewed all the evidence, all the financial records, all the statements. She asked if I wanted to speak. I said yes. I stood at the podium. I looked at Alina. She finally looked back. I said Alina had stolen $650,000 from our family business over 5 years. She'd used my husband to access my personal accounts. She'd taken $357,000 that belonged to me, but the money wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the betrayal, the years of sitting at family dinners while she spent my money, the years of watching my mother praise her financial savvy, the years of being told I was too serious, too focused on work, too unwilling to enjoy life. While Alina was enjoying my life, I said she'd made a choice. Every wire transfer, every lie, every conversation with Daniel about how I'd never find out, those were choices, and now she'd have to live with the consequences. Judge Okoye listened. She made notes. When I finished, she thanked me. Alina's attorney gave his statement. He talked about how Alina had struggled with mental health issues, how she made poor decisions, how she was deeply remorseful. Judge Okoye asked Alina if she wanted to speak. Alina stood. She said she was sorry, that she'd never meant for things to go this far, that she'd lost herself. Judge Okoye asked if she was sorry for what she'd done or sorry she'd been caught. Alina didn't answer right away, then she said both. Judge Okoye nodded. She said at least that was honest. She sentenced Alina to 6 years in federal prison, restitution of $430,000, 3 years supervised release after prison. Alina's legs buckled. Her attorney caught her. The marshals came to take her into custody. She looked at me one last time. I didn't look away. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just watched her go. Outside the courthouse, my father was waiting. He'd been in the gallery, but I hadn't seen him. He said he was proud of me for standing up, for telling the truth. I said thank you. He asked if I'd ever forgive Alina. I said I didn't know, maybe someday, but not today. He said he understood. He asked if I was staying at the company. I said yes, if he still wanted me. He said, of course. The company needed me, he needed me. I said I had conditions. He said name them. I said I wanted full operational control, equal partnership with Miguel, new financial protocols with outside oversight, and my mother couldn't have access to business accounts anymore. He hesitated on the last one. I said those were my terms, all of them non-negotiable. He nodded. He said okay. We shook hands. 3 months later, the divorce was final. Daniel was living in California, San Diego, working for a small construction firm. He'd sent me an email asking if we could talk. I deleted it without responding. The asset recovery was complete. $430,000 had been returned to the company accounts. I'd received $178,500. The settlement amount Daniel had agreed to pay. I used it to renovate the house. New kitchen, new master bathroom, new paint throughout. I erased every trace of the life I'd lived with him. Miguel and I restructured the company. We brought in a CFO. We implemented every control I'd recommended. We grew revenue by 18% in the first year. My mother and I spoke occasionally, brief calls, surface-level conversations. She'd asked once if I'd visit Alina in prison. I'd said no. She hadn't asked again. I started dating someone I'd met through work, an architect named Marcus Chen. He was kind, funny. He asked questions and actually listened to the answers. We took things slow. I wasn't in a hurry. 1 year after the sentencing, I was sitting in my office when my phone rang. Unknown number, I answered. It was Alina, calling from prison. She said she'd been thinking about what I'd said at the sentencing, about choices and consequences. She said she wanted me to know she understood now, what she'd done, what she'd destroyed. I asked why she was calling. She said she didn't expect forgiveness. She just wanted me to know she was sorry, really sorry. I was quiet for a moment. Then I said okay. She asked if okay meant I forgave her. I said no, okay meant I heard her. That was all she was getting. She said that was fair. I asked if she needed anything. She said no, she just wanted to call. We hung up. I sat there looking at my phone, thinking about the person I'd been 2 years ago, the person who'd found those wire transfers and smiled quietly because she'd already known, already been planning. That person had been angry, hurt, betrayed. This person was free. I looked around my office, the one I'd fought for, the company I'd protected, the life I'd rebuilt. I thought about Daniel in San Diego, Alina in federal prison, my mother living with the knowledge that she'd enabled all of it. I thought about the 473 documents in the folder labeled Project Homecoming, the 14 months of silence, the careful documentation, the strategic patience. I thought about Catherine telling me I'd done excellent work. that I'd built their entire case. I thought about my father shaking my hand, Miguel texting me that he was proud to work with me, Marcus asking me to dinner and meaning it when he said he wanted to know me. My name is Victoria Sandoval. I'm 42 years old. I own a construction company with my brother. I live in a house I renovated with money I recovered from my own sister. I sleep well at night. Some people in my family still think I went too far, that I should have handled it privately. That I humiliated Alina in front of everyone. They're not entirely wrong. I did humiliate her, in federal court, in front of a judge and attorneys and court reporters and my father and anyone else who wanted to watch. But she started it. She started it when she created that shell company, when she enlisted my husband, when she stole from me for 5 years while sitting across from me at Sunday dinners. She counted on my silence, my niceness, my unwillingness to make waves. She counted wrong. If you're setting yourself on fire to keep someone else warm, stop, document everything. Find your Catherine Stone, build your case brick by brick, and when the moment comes, don't hesitate. Your yellow envelope is waiting. You just have to be brave enough to fill it. Hit that like button and share this story. Comment freedom below if you're claiming your life back today. Thank you for being here with me. Thank you for listening. And remember, the people who underestimate you are giving you the greatest gift. They're giving you the element of surprise.